Hi, I'm Jeff Schoep, and I'm here with my co-host Acacia Dietz, and this is Beyond Barriers. Welcome to the show. All right, on tonight's episode, we are going to talk about a little bit about the Beyond Barriers concept. Acacia, did you have something you wanted to get started on that?
Um, First, I was just thinking that we should just go over the whole concept of the beyond barriers and like what exactly it is that we mean. I know you and I have talked before about how a lot of times when people are involved with like extremist movements and stuff like that, or any type of extremism or radicalization, is that we wind up being in our heads, like in our own echo chamber, whether that's the people that we surround ourselves with, the things we read, the things we watch, political, societal, all of those things. Um, One question I did have for you, and maybe you can explain to people, is when people talk about having an echo chamber, what exactly does that mean? What does it mean to have an echo chamber and to be in an echo chamber?
Well, to be in an echo chamber is basically like everything that just like a lot like the concept says, everything that you're saying is being thrown back at you. So in a sense, being in an extremist movement, like being in an echo chamber, for example, like ourselves, being involved with the National Socialist movement, say you came across some kind of issue, some kind of problem or something like that, or well, let's just use for an example, say one started doubting some of the racial ideologies and things like that. To put those questions to someone else in the group, that's your echo chamber. That is most of the people, once you're involved in these kind of groups, and you don't even realize it. Like most of the people around you, your friends, your associates, everybody is also part of this echo chamber. So when you're saying something that is maybe outside of the box, that maybe doesn't fit into that definition of what the group believes in, and you ask or you mention it to someone else in the group, you're getting an echo back of basically the information what the group think is, just like being in a cult, like everybody in the cult backs up what the cult thinks. It's very similar in extremist organizations, whether it's the right, the left, or religious, like say jihadism or religious extremism of other kinds. You get involved in these things, you don't really realize it, and it's very difficult to reach out to other people to talk about this stuff because everybody is inside that echo chamber. So a lot of times, um, reaching out to somebody outside of that box or outside of that echo chamber is very difficult because you're like, let's just use the movements we came out of, for example. You're not going to reach out to Antifa or somebody that's on the far left extreme because those are the people that um, you saw as your enemies. So you're certainly not going to reach out to them in most cases. So there has to be some kind of middle of the way resource. There has to be some sort of resource where people can reach out and understand the person that's coming out of the movement. And that's where Beyond Barriers, we feel that we fill that void. We give the individual, an opportunity to reach out to somebody that has been part of an extremist movement in many cases or understands it very well, and can identify with some of that thinking. And then a person's thinking and political, religious views or whatever, can be all over the board, so to speak. There's not a certain uh, way. There's not a specific way that tells somebody like, well, when you come out of the far right, you have to go to the far left, or you have to go to the Republicans, or you have to go to the Democrats or the Libertarians, or vice, whatever. There is no specific group that one has to go towards, but being centrist and being right in that middle area where you kind of understand all those things, I think that's what gives us really a leg up on that, because most people that are involved in the extreme versions of the far right anyways are not going to reach out to the opposite extremes. They're going to reach out to people that understand where they're coming from, and someone that's not going to be judgmental. And I think that's where we certainly try to fill that void. We're not judgmental. You can come to us and tell us, you're having thoughts that are completely the opposite of everything that you've been a part of, and we're not going to judge you. We're not going to look down on you, and we certainly understand it. It's okay, and that's what we're here for.
Okay, another thing is too is that when we're, and I know this is one thing I noticed with me, and I know you and I have talked about it, is that when you're in that echo chamber, you, I know I didn't even realize that I was even had this echo chamber and that I had built this entire um bubble or barrier, between me and anybody else or anything else. Like, when did you realize that you had an echo chamber around you, or that you had built something that necessarily wasn't a part of, normal society per se? Like, is that something that you just kind of had an epiphany one day, or is it something that, I know for me at least, like, I had no idea that I had closed myself off to any thoughts or ideas of anything else. Um, and you were involved for 25 plus years. I thankfully was only involved for a couple of years, but still, even within that short period of time, it wasn't until I had started to come out and we had started talking that I realized that I cut off everybody that wasn't of the same mindset. How do you, once you realize that, how do you go about trying to change it?
See, and I was just going to ask you this. I was going to ask you the same question, but you kind of answered it, because you were asking me when did I realize there was an echo chamber. Just to clarify what you were saying, you didn't realize it until you got out. Am I correctly understanding that?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, when I was involved in it, I really did not realize how secluded I had become and how cut off from the outside world I had become. And it wasn't until I finally decided that enough was enough and I wanted out and I just completely cut everything off. And it was at that point, at least for me, that I realized that, like, that was what my entire world had consisted of. And that, yeah, that was everything that it consisted of. And so for me, at least, it wasn't until I had actually separated myself from the movement and from the people and the influences that it really, really dawned on me how much of an echo chamber I had lived in.
Well, exactly, and that's what I was going to say as well, is basically when you're involved in it, you don't see it. You really don't. It's really uncommon, I think, at least in the people that I've worked with, since I've been out too, is for someone to say, "Oh, I know I was in the echo chamber." That would be, to me, that would be like, wow, that's a really aware individual,
Right.
because I certainly didn't. I certainly didn't. It wasn't something that really I figured out and processed until after getting out, and then basically seeing and understanding those things. It's something that comes later. It's something that if you realized it when you were there, you probably would have gotten out sooner.
Right.
So I think a lot of people don't realize it. They don't get what they're saying, or what's being said there. And that they're part of that echo chamber. They don't really see that. I know I didn't. It wasn't until later, but it makes a lot of sense when you're analyzing and you're on the outside looking back in, because I did the same thing. When I left, I cut contact with just about everybody. I maintained a few contacts at first that I had to, finish up business for the organization and things like that. But besides that, I cut off contact with everybody until um, I was able to get my bearings about myself and move forward with my life. Because once you're in that echo chamber, as long as you remain there, that's the first step, really. I think for people to acknowledge and to understand, when you're trying to get out of something like this, you really have to disengage first, and that's completely different if you've been online radicalized and maybe you need to disengage from the computer. But if
Right.
you've radicalized in the real world like we did, with an actual organization, with a structure and all this kind of stuff, um, getting away from those individuals and processing things and reintegrating back into regular society is a big part of it, because a lot of us that were involved in these extremist organizations, we were very that was our whole world. That was everybody that we knew just about. I mean, of course you had, you know, people that you work with, and there was people, it wasn't everybody that you knew was in the movement, but those were the people that you trusted. Those were the people that that you confided in, and those were in a lot of ways that was family. For a lot of people it is family. A lot of people's families completely disown them when they go into an extremist group, whether it's the right, the left, religious extremism, a cult. A lot of times families just won't put up with it, or the individual that's involved will be trying to force it down the family's throat, and so on and so forth. And it causes a lot of trauma within the family unit for a lot of people. So once you're in that echo chamber, it is a lot of people too, they don't realize it. They don't actually, well, like we just said, they really, you can't see it, and you can't go, okay, well, everybody I know is in the echo chamber. You know, you don't see it that way. So it's
Right.
very difficult to process things that are outside of the box, that are processing things that you might be questioning. You know, like if somebody's questioning certain things inside the echo chamber, they need to have a resource, somebody they can reach out to that understands it, but won't judge them, and won't you know, pound the ideology back into their heads, because that's exactly what can happen.
Right. Yeah, I know, at least for me, um, the disengagement part. Now, a lot of times when we talk about de radicalization and disengagement and leaving extremist organizations and movements and everything, a lot of people tend to have it. And I know before I personally experienced it, I kind of was of this mindset that when you want to get out of a gang or when you want to leave a cult, you just stop. You just stop, you leave, you start a new life, go your own way. It wasn't until I had been involved with the movement and wanted to leave that I realized that there is more of a process to this. It's not as simple as people think. I mean, the initial is simple, but it still is kind of like a step by step process. And I know you mentioned the disengagement, and disengagement by far, I think, is the most important step, because if you don't fully disengage, then it's a lot more difficult to de-radicalize. However, I know, at least in your circumstance, your de-radicalization started before your disengagement. And I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding why or how that's even possible. Um, just briefly, for those of our viewers and listeners that are more new to this, can you kind of explain a little bit, at least for you yourself? Because a lot of people look at you like you were the leader for 25 years, and here you are, and they're thinking, oh, well, there's no way that somebody that was a leader and held these, you know, beliefs and thoughts so dear for so long is going to be able just to swing around and do a 180. But as many people don't realize, that 180 didn't start when you retired and when you left. Can you briefly just explain how that worked for you personally?
Sure. And my case, excuse me, my case is a little bit is not really a common case. You don't really have a lot of people that are in the upper levels of an organization that are leaving like that. So, and you're right. In my case, the de-radicalization process started while I was still involved in the group, which is not typically the common way what we see most people doing. And you're right. It's actually much more effective to disengage first and then de-radicalize, and that's the process with Beyond Barriers that we typically use. But in my personal case, I was not disengaged until I retired in early March 2019. Now, I wish I would have disengaged several years before that, but I was de-radicalizing several years before that, and how to best explain that, or kind of complicate, it's a complicated process. But for me, as I was starting to not believe some of the things that I was saying, and having, I felt like by 2016, early 2017, the racial aspects of my belief system were pretty much crumbled apart. I really didn't have that belief. I was still very anti-Semitic up until the time when I left, but I was not struggling with the racial issues like I had been for many, many years before that. So what I was doing was I was projecting some of these changes in my own personal belief to the policies in the organization. The organization ceased use of the swastika in public in 2016, as far as changing the symbolism of the organization from a swastika to an Odo rune to try to, basically, as I was de-radicalizing in my own mindset, I was projecting that upon the organization and trying to, in my mind at the time, and this is another thing that's kind of complicated to explain, but I was of the belief that the organization, the National Socialist Movement, could be turned into a white civil rights organization. Now, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig.
Right.
And in this case, I thought that I was going to make the Nazi Party into a white civil rights organization, which, looking back on it now, it's like I want to slap myself in the head. It's like, how does that make any sense? How, as an enlightened individual, or I'd like to think I'm somewhat intelligent, that as a somewhat intelligent individual, that I could think something like that would even work. But that's part of when you're radicalized, when you're so radicalized and you're looking at an organization, excuse me, excuse me. So when you're that radicalized and you're looking at an organization like that, you can't see beyond that. Like, you're saying, oh, that makes sense. At the time, I thought it made complete sense. I thought, wow, this makes sense. I can make the National Socialist Movement into a white rights organization, and that would be great. That's what I thought at the time, but no, absolutely not. I mean, I look back on it now and wonder how did, I want to shake myself and say, Jeff, how did you get to that place where you actually believed that that was even possible, or that was righteous, that was normal? No, it wasn't, and it's simply for me. So the de-radicalization process was going on in real time, so to speak, in computer language there. In real time, my de-radicalization process was going on the last few years that I was involved in the movement. And I don't recommend it.
Right.
So, I mean, I can explain, that's my part of my story, but I don't recommend it. The correct way of doing things is to disengage. And I think personally, if I would have disengaged back in 2016, I don't think it would have even taken me as long to figure out a lot of the things that I've figured out now from the outside looking in. I mean, once you're outside of it and you're evaluating your life and you're looking back on mistakes and different things that, you spend a lot of time beating yourself up, and a lot of time, looking back on that and wondering why you didn't make those moves sooner, or that sort of thing. But, you have to come to a point in your life where, and for the people that are looking at getting out now, or that have just gotten out and struggle with these things, a lot of people really struggle with it. And you can get caught in this, tornado where you're just beating yourself up over the past and things like that. And I don't think that's healthy for a lot of the individuals that are coming out to do that. I think it's important to realize you did make a mistake. It wasn't good to be involved in this, that, I know that, we know. And, a lot of us carry a lot of shame and embarrassment and things like that from being involved in it,
Right.
I think having a little bit of that is healthy, and I think it's humbling and it's important, but making that one's main focus is not healthy for moving forward in life. And it was actually a Jewish lady that had told me that. She says, you've got to let go of all of that from the past and focus on the wonderful, good, positive things you're doing now. And forgiveness is an important part of that, and you have to be able to forgive yourself. And that's a hard thing to do, I think, for a lot of us, especially when you look back and you focus on many of the things that you've done for especially people like myself that have been involved for so long. There's a lot to be guilty of, and there's a lot to be ashamed of, but that is what drives me to do what I'm doing now, and the good positive things I'm doing now. So I have to look at it that way, and you should too, and anybody else that's out there. I'm not saying that everybody needs to take the same path we're taking and do this kind of work. If you want to, the more the better. You're more than welcome. We can use all the help we can get, but it's not expected. It's not something that you have to do. No one's making us do this. It's not something that anyone said you have to do this or you should do this. We took this upon ourselves, and we do this kind of work because we care and we want to make a difference.
Exactly. I totally agree. And this kind of work is not for everybody. But it is definitely needed. It is definitely needed, and everybody has something different to offer. Um, I One of the things, like you had mentioned, how like you know breaking. You've mentioned before about like breaking out of those barriers and breaking out of those echo chambers and all of that, like breaking those mindsets of like you were involved for over 25 years, and I've noticed from like the last couple of years things weren't quite as, I guess, vocally radical in the speeches what some would think would be. It was kind of toned down comparative to like say back in the 90s. Still radical, but how did you personally, because my story is a little bit different. We can get to that in a little bit, but like for those people that are coming out of racism and that are very, very, like it is ingrained in them, some people have been taught to be racist from being a kid. Like we're not born racist. And I would love to dispute anybody that tries to say that anybody's actually born racist. Like, I don't believe that at all. I wasn't raised that way at all. So the fact that I became a part of a movement that was based on race, I think surprises a lot of people. But how did you start to break down those barriers for yourself? Like, how did you go from like being radical to the extreme that we're honest on here. So way back in the 90s, holding a noose to now being friends with Daryl Davis. Like, how were you able to start breaking down those narratives, those false narratives?
Well, yeah, and you had to bring that up in the in the 90s on the state capitol of in Topeka, Kansas. I was holding up a noose and at a protest there, and saying that we came to Kansas to bring some justice to the people we were protesting against down there. It was a really horrific incident, which we don't need to get into that, but exactly, I went from being that radical, from standing on the state capitol steps holding a noose, to doing the work that we do today with Beyond Barriers. I mean, I think, growing up, I wasn't raised this way. I wasn't raised to be involved in this sort of thing. Race wasn't an issue in our household growing up, and I grew up in a normal, middle class family, so it wasn't a learned behavior for me either. It was something that I went into and picked up and spent my entire adult life in, unfortunately. So, but we want to talk a little bit about the power of change. If
Right.
someone like myself that had spent their entire adult life involved in this type of politics, and in this type of radical thinking and ideology, anyone can change. And as you know, with some of the people that we've helped to get out, there's been some people that have been in the movement, that were in the movement just as long as I was or longer, older people. And then also, I don't know for what reason I thought it, but when I first got out, I thought it would be a lot easier. We'd be dealing with a lot of younger people that were just starting to get in the movement, that they would be the easiest people to help to leave. And I think we kind of busted up that stereotype, at least in my own mind. I feel like we busted that up, because we have people of all different age groups that have contacted us and that have gotten out. And it's definitely doesn't have anything to do with age. You can't say, well, at 21, after that, it's much harder. No, it's really a process that we can get to people at any kind of age or developmental process. throughout being involved in something like this. It's basically, but to answer your question directly, as far as what helped me to see some of these things, some of the thinking and the processes were wrong, part of it was meeting incredible people like Daryl Davis, who you mentioned, who works with us now at Beyond Barriers as well. Dia Khan, a Muslim filmmaker who I met and became friends with. Also living here in Detroit, the city of Detroit helped de-radicalize me in a lot of ways. I think that would surprise a lot of people because simply, I lived in Minneapolis, St. Paul before, but I really kept myself separate from all the different races and all the different people that were there. Here in Detroit, I had more interaction with people, with the community and things like that. So I was able to, and the whites are the minority in the city of Detroit. So I had an opportunity to be around people of all different backgrounds and just in general daily life, meeting different people. And it quickly dissipated a lot of those old hatreds and things that I came up with. A lot of it myself, and a lot of it was through propagandizing and things over the years, and reading. Being radicalized through not just the internet, but before that, for me, with books and things like that. Reading some of these things that radicalized and reinforced those beliefs. So I'd say real life experiences with people experiencing things and meeting people helps put a lot of that stuff to rest. And I think that's probably one of the more effective ways that we can reach people is if someone's involved in this radical stuff, meeting an incredible person like Daryl Davis or like Dia Khan, meeting people like that, just blast the stereotypes out of the water that we're really all just human beings. We're just people. It doesn't have nothing to do with skin color, religion, ethnicity, all these kind of things. I mean, if people derive happiness or things like that, go to a German festival or go to a African heritage
Right.
festival from Kenya or whatever country, it doesn't matter, or France or Japan or whatever. All those things are fine and they're interesting and they're for everybody, really. And everybody should experience these different things because then you don't get caught up in organizations like we did.
Right.
you know?
Right.
If you better understand that people are people, it doesn't really have anything to do with their religion or their skin color.
Right. One of the things I know we try to do if somebody comes to us and is struggling with the race or religion issue, because I know the far right out and over in the UK and stuff, their more of their issue isn't so much like the skin color or racial issues as it is more of the Islamophobia and the issues with a lot of those within the Muslim faith and stuff. And I know we've talked with Ivan Humble from the UK, amazing person, but the person that de-radicalized him was a Muslim, and he was very hardcore Islamophobic and very hardcore against Muslim. And the person that helped de-radicalize him was a Muslim, a devout Muslim. And then, and then now to hear you talk how people that helped de-radicalize you was Daryl Davis, who is a black man, and Dia Khan, who is both Muslim and I can never remember her descent, but it doesn't matter. The fact is the fact that people from other races helped. And I know with Beyond Barriers, that's one thing we try to do too. Like a lot of people that are involved with these types of groups and organizations, part of the issue is that they have not been I don't want to say subjected, but they have not been around other cultures or other ethnicities, and to be able to show them that they are human too, and that this is a human thing. This isn't a racial thing. This isn't a religion thing. This is a human thing, and we are all human. So I think that's very important that you mentioned that's what helps break a lot of those barriers down. And then once you start the process of breaking those barriers and seeing beyond them, then you're able to move ahead. Otherwise, a lot of times that is what keeps you in that echo chamber. I know Daryl Davis had mentioned before, like a lot of things are based off of fear and ignorance. And when we are afraid, and I know you don't like that term being afraid because it's not a macho thing, and most men don't consider fear, a part of their vocabulary. It's just what you guys do. But that a lot of times is what creates these barriers between human beings is the fear of the unknown and the ignorance. And if we would just sit down face to face and talk to each other, we would realize that this is a human problem. This isn't a political problem. Yeah, there are political problems. This isn't a skin color problem. Because let's call it what it is. Race, typically, at least here in the United States, when we talk about racial tensions, is typically people looking at the color of somebody's skin, white, red, black, yellow, white, whatever it is. And instead, we need to step past those and to look at each other as human beings. And that's my rant for the day. But go ahead, sorry.
No, no, I was just going to say, I mean, that's just it too. And a lot of times, if you remember in the movement, we would exploit those things. If
Oh,
someone
yeah.
came to us and said, "Hey, I had this really bad experience with this black gang or with this black guy or whatever it was, or a Jewish person or an Oriental person, Asian, whatever. If they had a bad experience, we would exploit that. We would be like, yes, that's what they're all like, and we'd feed into that, as you know. And whether the person came to us from that, if they were hardcore Christian, we'd get them Christian propaganda that would back up our statements, or we would focus on all these different things, whether it was race or whatever it was that motivated that individual. We could focus on that and keep them grounded with that. And that's that's definitely a brainwashing tactic in a lot of ways. Every way, really. But the concept of beyond barriers too, basically the concept is that you've erected a barrier in your mind and you've put it there. No one shoved that barrier in there. You put it there and you've put yourself behind it and you can't see beyond that. And that goes back to the echo chamber thing we talked about earlier. An echo chamber is constantly being bounced back at you. The barrier concept is the exact same thing. You are behind this barrier. You don't see beyond it. Everybody that's outside of the barrier, and at least if you're in the far right, the way we operated in the NSM was, if you were outside of that barrier, the NSM didn't call it a barrier. That's what we're calling it. But anybody that was outside of that box or outside of our line of thinking when we were that part of that was the enemy. It didn't matter. The other races were automatically the enemies, but half the white people were also outside that because they didn't like what we stood for or what we were doing. So they were also the enemy. In fact, in a lot of cases, they were even worse in our book because they should have stayed with their tribe and stayed with us. That was our line of thinking. And if you look at it now, looking back on it, how polarizing that is. I ask myself all the time, how the heck did I get involved in this? And why did I stay so long? And then you get into a process where you're beating yourself up over it. But, when you break down that ideology and once you're behind that barrier, it's hard to see beyond it. You have to literally get a ladder, climb up and start peeking over it to see outside of it. And hopefully when they're peeking over that ladder, they see beyond barriers and they get a hold of us, because if you're peeking over the ladder, then you need to reach out to us now, like yesterday, like right now, get in touch with us, because when you're behind that barrier, when you're trapped behind those walls, it's very difficult to see anything outside of that. No matter, even when we met people like Daryl Davis or like Dia Khan or countless other people, and they're public figures, so I don't mind mentioning them, and they're okay with us mentioning them too, so we'll mention them. But there's a lot of other people that had a profound effect in my life as well along the way, and I know in yours as well. The important thing is that people don't realize that when you're trapped behind that barrier, when you're inside that box, you don't allow yourself to see the good in others a lot of times. So when someone comes along like Daryl or Dia, you'll say, well, maybe he was a good one, or he was one of the good ones, but the rest, they're all bad. Or if you met like a guy at work, you could say, well, Jim at work, he's black, and he's a hardworking guy and he cares for his family. He's all right. But, he must be the exception because the rest of all those black people, they're bad. And that's the kind of stuff we'd say to ourselves. And when we'd have those conversations with other members of the movement, that's how in the echo chamber, it would get justified. It would be like, well, yeah, because not everybody would say, not every single one of them is bad. Many of the people would have these experiences where there would be a guy at work or a lady at work that was really nice, that they liked, and they started questioning it in their head, like, maybe this racism is stupid. Maybe it's not correct. Oh, well, you met that one lady or that one guy at work, but what about all these crime statistics? What about this? What about that bad experience you had? Or what about when we were at that rally and that, communist chunked a brick at us? What about that? They must all do that, and it's very easy. It's very, very easy for the mind to trick itself and to get caught up in those echo chambers and to stay stuck in there. So, I mean, looking at it now, I think from the outside looking in, a lot of people think that people that are stuck in it are very ignorant or very, very uneducated and very stupid. And that's not always the case. I mean, there's people that are involved that just, once that's all you see and hear, it's very, very easy. And again, you can't paint it with a broad brush. You can't say everybody that's involved is an uneducated redneck hillbilly, from the
Right.
backwoods. Nothing against hillbillies. I know lots of great hillbillies, but I'm saying, painting that brush and saying everybody's uneducated that's involved in it, that's just as bad as the people that are in it saying everybody that's outside of it is evil or going to hell or a communist or something else that they don't like. It's very easy to paint people with a broad brush and say, well, all black people do this, all white people do this, all Asian people do this. That's not even true. People are people. I mean, it just doesn't, stereotypes, you can always find a stereotype that's going to fit the bill,
Right.
for something, but that's not life. That's not how it is. That's not reality.
One thing I always say too is that because people want to say, oh, well, this is a racial issue, this is a class issue, this is an economic issue, whatever. And one thing I always say is that, like you were saying, it's a people issue, it's a human issue. We live in a broken world with broken people. So the only way that we're going to fix any of that is by starting to fix ourselves and then helping one another. And it's very easy to get caught up and to paint everybody with that broad brush and be like, well, all of these people on the right or all of these people on the left or all these people in the center, that they all act like this. And it's not, we're all individuals. And I remember at one point in time when I was younger, it's just like you would strive to be that individual. You wanted to be your own person, your own mind, and everything else. And I see nowadays that it's almost like if you're willing to be yourself and to be your own person, that it's not as accepted as what it once was. But I think, personally at least, that needs to start to change because that is what makes up such a beautiful world and such a diverse world, is that we are all our own person, regardless of race or skin color or political ideology. We're all human beings. We need to stop looking at one another as the other, as the enemy. Like you said, when you're involved in these movements, everybody that is not a part of that movement, they are the enemy. They could be an old 90-year-old grandmother that just baked you cookies. And yet, in your mind, she was not a part of the group. So did she poison it? Is she just trying to get information? It becomes a very paranoid thought. And you sit and you look at it after coming out of it, and you're like, dude, she just baked me cookies. She was trying to be nice. And here I am questioning it because she wasn't one of us. And I know, at least for me, that was, and even now, I'll have thoughts that kind of go through my head, and I'll have to stop myself and be like, look, no, it's just a regular person, you know? And it's just, we need to see one another as the human beings that we are. That doesn't mean that there aren't crappy humans. There are crappy humans. There are evil people. I mean, there's people that have gone out and murdered hundreds or one person or whatever. Like, there are bad people. But we need to see them as individual people that have done bad things, not all people of this race or all people of that, all people of this political ideology. You know, we're still human.
Even with political ideologies, and people do not realize this, how radicalized they are, even for their own political ideologies. And we talk about polarization, which is a pretty common word now, but because of how polarized our society is right now. And I have a really good example that I watched part of the presidential debates last night. And we're not going to get too political on the show, but this is a great example. Okay. So a lot of times nowadays, the Republicans and the Democrats, they will not even talk to each other. Like you will lose friends over this. That's why I just try to stay out of it the best I can. But when I see hypocrisy, I point it out, and people get mad. They get really, really mad really quick. But one thing I noticed, for example, during the debate, like they asked Donald Trump if he will, speak out against white supremacy. And, he's condemned white supremacy over and over and over again. But people want to keep twisting it into something else. They did the same thing with Joe Biden. Now, with Joe Biden, Trump was getting him to say, like, hey, well, do you support the riots? Do you support Antifa? Biden wouldn't mention the word Antifa, but he said he didn't agree with the criminality and the rioting and things like that. Trump basically did the same thing. They both denounced things that are negative, but they didn't do it in a sense that pleased everyone. You
Right.
see what I'm saying? So all of a sudden, Trump is a white supremacist and Joe Biden is Antifa. And I don't think either one is accurate. Neither one I don't believe is accurate. So that's a perfect example right there of something where people from the Republican side really wanted to hear Biden denounce Antifa because of the rioting and the burning and the looting and all that. And people from the Democratic side really wanted to hear Donald Trump denounce white supremacy, but neither side got their full wish in that, even though both individuals pretty much condemned both of those things.
Right.
They didn't say it in a way that pleased everybody. So here we are back to this polarization. And once again, if people can hear me, I'm not endorsing either one of these candidates. I'm just pointing out something that was very clear to me when I'm watching, when I was watching the debates, what I think people wanted to hear and what people are upset about. And you see people on Twitter, and I'm on Twitter quite a bit, so I see both sides chirping back and forth at each other about these are the things they didn't like about the other candidate, and I kind of feel like both candidates covered those issues, but they're not getting credit for it. So it just shows how polarizing things are in society right now. And I thought that was a good and relevant and current political example of where people are using a broad brush. And it's not just on race, that's in politics right there. But the same concept, especially coming from where we came from out of the movement, is used with race. But that's a concept. A lot of times people say, well, I don't really need to watch this Beyond Barriers because it's all about race. No, we're talking politics now too. And these concepts that we're involved in, go pass over. It's not just, these concepts and these things can be used on race and religion, which we clearly show, but they also affect larger segments of society, like in the political process. And I think people in general, Americans, people from other countries, we need to get over these things and start seeing each other as human beings and not Republicans and Democrats or black and white or as a race or religion or Muslims or Jews or all these things, that can vilify and divide, but we are just humans.
Right. And you mentioned vilify, and I think a lot of times when individuals are in these groups, organizations, movements, whatever it is, these radical and extremist ideologies, you vilify other humans, you dehumanize without realizing it. I know for me, and it doesn't make it right. One thing that led me down the rabbit hole was seeing the dehumanization coming from the far left towards those on the far right. And originally, my mindset was it made me mad. It really made me mad. And it frustrated me. And I was hell bent on showing individuals that those people on the far right, even though they had like wrong ideologies, that they were still human. But did I realize that that opened the door as far as, surrounding myself with people? My intentions originally weren't to become involved at all. But you mentioned about propaganda and how these movements, whether it's right, left, political or uh, religious, they will use any narrative that they can and twist it to their advantage. And that is exactly what it does. I mean, that's exactly what it is. But the people on the left are like, the people on the right are dehumanizing us and they're saying that we're less than human and we don't matter and we're just these evil people. But then you got the people on the right saying, well, the people on the left are dehumanizing us and saying we're these evil people. Well, a lot of times you don't stop to realize that you are just as guilty as what you were accusing the other of doing.
Great,
And
great point.
it,
Great.
it, I saw it today on a like a short like 7 minute Vice documentary or whatever that somebody was saying, well, all of these people and the media are dehumanizing us and saying that we're evil. If you would just come and talk to us, and you can't argue with that because that's what we should be doing. Is we should be go to the other. You might despise them. You might think everything that they believe and everything that they are saying is despicable and horrible and evil. But if you give them the respect of at least listening, if they are a genuine person, they will give, because you showed respect when they didn't think you would, majority of the time you will find that they will respect you enough to hear you out. I know that's one thing that Daryl Davis has said time and again. Like, not every black man can go to a Klan rally, or should, or should. But Daryl Davis, because he is willing to sit down with somebody from the Klan, knowing full well that they despise him simply because of his skin color, but he is willing to show them respect and listen. Surprisingly enough, majority of them have sat down and whether they liked him or not, at least heard him out. And that has opened up so many doors. So if we can just treat each other with decency and respect, that doesn't mean you're going to win everybody over. I mean, I've seen people that have been like, you know what? I think you're crazy. You know, I think what you believe is completely wrong and I'm going to go my merry way. Well, okay, that's fine. But at least you sat down and had a discussion. Like you said, not to get political, because at Beyond Barriers, we are nonpartisan. Like, we don't choose those sides, you know, because we see it as a human problem. This is a people thing. This is a human thing. But if this country and people in this country would just sit down and talk to one another, we'd get a lot more accomplished than we would going and, you know, fighting or burning things down. Yeah, it makes a statement. I don't think it's right. But how many things have been solved by acting out of anger? Like, actually, truly solved and come to a good conclusion from acting out of anger. I can't think of one. I could be wrong, but at least in all my experience and, with raising kids and everything else, they go and they throw a temper tantrum. If I give them what they want, they throw a bigger temper tantrum next time. And it doesn't make somebody mature. It doesn't make a country mature and grow. And that's my only 2 cents on that one. But if we can just sit and talk to one another and view each other as human beings and not solely as the enemy because you're different than me, we will get a lot more accomplished and a lot more lives will be saved and not lost.
Exactly. And, we talk about dehumanization. It brought me to another memory that I had in the last couple of years that I was involved in the movement. I was doing an interview, and I want to say it was with some station, some TV station out of South America, but I don't remember exactly. But I was talking about dehumanization because at this point in my process, in my own process, I was noticing about how the left was dehumanizing people in the movement. And I was using that exact statement. And at the time, I didn't think much of it. But when I was processing these things and looking back on it, on my memories and things like that, and the way that these reporters were looking at me when I was talking about how we in the movement were being dehumanized, they were looking at me like, oh my God, what is this guy talking about? And it wasn't until I got out that I saw the utter hypocrisy. Because I couldn't figure out, why are they giving me that look? At the time, I couldn't figure it out. I was like,
Exactly.
why are they looking at me like that? I was thinking, like they're giving me this baffled look, like they're not understanding what I'm saying. But I got it after I processed these things, that here's a guy that's running the Nazi party, the NSM, talking about dehumanization. The utter hypocrisy of that, the absolute hypocrisy and almost, I would say, insanity, but I wasn't insane. But the utter hypocrisy of it is to be able to notice that your enemies at the time were dehumanizing you, but not to be able to acknowledge that you dehumanized entire races of people, entire religions. I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't realize, I didn't see it. I didn't know that I was doing that. I didn't acknowledge it. I couldn't see it. I was blind to it.
Right.
It wasn't until later that these things processed. So, I mean, this is part of the process too. And when we're looking at extremists, no matter what they're involved in, and I constantly have to remind myself of this when I'm dealing with people with biases and things like that. Now, I constantly have to remind myself back to this type of memory and go, look, Jeff, you couldn't see it either. So try to approach them from a different manner. Try to get to where they're at and plant some seeds. And that's exactly what Daryl Davis and Dia Khan do, is
Yep.
they have planted those seeds, and that type of process, that is the greatest, most powerful way of getting through to people. It's what worked on me. It's what worked on you, if I might say so. It's what worked on so many of the vast majority of the people that we've helped bring out with Beyond Barriers, that we've gotten out of extremism. We've used those exact same, I don't want to say tactics, it's not the right word, but those exact same
Strategies.
processes, strategies,
Yep.
whatever you want to call it. We've used that ability to talk to people that way, to listen, to be heard.
And I just had one more thing real quick. I know we're starting to run low on time, but um, one of the things that I think seems to be a misconception, or a very large misconception, is people think that once you're away from it, once you're out of the cult, once you're out of the extremist movement and away from the ideology, that that's where the process ends. you're out. Great, you're out, and then you can go on your merry life. Whereas you and I both know, like, that's where the work starts in being out of any sort of extremism or cult or any type of mindset like that. There's a lot of unworking to be done and whatnot. Um, but one thing I just wanted to express really quick is that there is a need for constant support for those that are coming out of these movements because they literally are leaving their entire life. It is like I've used this example before and I will use it again because it covers everything. Being in a cult or being in an extremist movement is very similar to having an addiction. And I say that very, very, very carefully, but that is the closest thing that I can compare it to the psychology of it, not the physical of it, but the psychology of it. Because here, a lot of times, like with an addiction, your entire life will revolve around it. Your entire mentality conforms around it. And when somebody leaves these movements, when somebody comes to Beyond Barriers or comes to you or, wants to get help, a lot of times people are very glad that they got out and are like, great, that's awesome. And then they leave it at that, not realizing that this individual has made that first step, but then still needs the support of others because it is very, very lonely. Because I know for me personally, when I left everything. I cut pretty much everybody off. And it wasn't until I cut everybody off that was in that movement and a part of that ideology that I realized I had been living in an echo chamber. I had cut my family off. I had cut my friends off. And then now I'm left wondering how in the world do you go back after you've been over here on this side? And like I said, I'll use this analogy really quick. It's kind of like a lot of times you take a drug addict out of a drug house. You go, you pick that person up, you bring them out, you clean them up, they get clean, they get sober, you hand them the keys to a new apartment. You're like, here you go, have a great day. And then you leave and you're never seen from again. You cannot expect that person not to go back to that drug house just because they're clean. Because if they don't have the support that they need, there's a few things that either they'll go back to that drug house, they'll sink into a deep depression. They might not use drugs, but they're feeling constantly alone. So they might sink into a deep depression. So keep that in mind when, you as a society as a whole wants people to stop going down a certain path, no matter what path that is, and want them to do a 180, which is good, which we need to. We need people to stop radicalizing. We need to support those that want to come out of the radicalization, no matter what side it is, politically, socially, whatever. They need support and they need to know that there are those there that care and that they're not alone. So if there's anything that I could say, that would be the biggest one. I think as a society, it's very easy to forget that. To forget that these are humans, these are people with real life problems and issues, just like Joe Schmo down the street coming out of this, and then they need to be treated as such. So that if anybody hears anything, I would say that's a really big thing. And that's one thing at Beyond Barriers that we try to do is to let people know that there is a support system out there for them. A lot of Beyond Barriers isn't, I would say, is somewhat non-conventional as far as it doesn't fit inside society's little box that they've set up for the countering violent extremism sphere and the preventing violent extremism sphere, but it works. It works.
Absolutely. And that's, I'm glad you said it, because that was very eloquent and very true. I mean, it definitely, we don't conform to anything that's inside the box, so to speak, because we're working with a very, a volatile subject and subject matter, and human beings are complicated, and it's not something that you can just say, okay, well, I mean, we did that in the movement. We threw people all inside a certain box and painted them with that broad paintbrush. And we're not doing that now. That doesn't work. That's not effective. And the Beyond Barriers approach is different, and it will always be different.
One thing you mentioned, with the Beyond Barriers is that we do take a different approach to it, and we do catch a lot of flack for that also. But as you said, I mean, it's worth it, because our goal and our mission is to help people, to address those issues, and keep people free from the radical extremism, to save lives. And sometimes what works for another is not going to work for somebody else. And so that's why, we decided to come at it from a different angle, and to come at it from a place of experience. For you, you have over 25 years in this, and being around individuals and people, and like vast, I have no idea how many people you've ever come in contact with in and out of the movement, but everybody needs something different. And so that is one thing that I was very thankful for when you decided that you came to me with the Beyond Barriers concepts and everything, of taking a different approach to helping people. And that's our focus. Our focus is people and humans, and saving lives, and helping those that don't know where else to go, to be that, safety net, and to
Well,
help the public understand where these individuals are coming from, so that society as a whole can help them back integrate into society as well. Sorry for cutting you off.
No, I probably interrupted you. So, but thank you for that. And I wanted to say too, I'm not coming here and trying to say that our concept is the only concept that'll work. I just know from lived experience and from my experience that the concept does work. Different concepts work for different people. There's some people that might come through our program that it doesn't work for them at all, and somebody else might be able to reach them. I just know what worked for me, and those concepts, very successful people that have been very effective at it. Daryl Davis, Dia Khan, and the concepts that we use. I mean, those we know they work. Doesn't mean they'll work for everybody, but we know that they work. They worked on us, and they work for a lot of the people that we've been able to help. So, we're gonna shout it from the rooftops that we think Beyond Barriers is the way to go, and our approach is different. And some people don't like it, and you can call us whatever names you want out there. It's not gonna make a difference. It's not gonna stop our work. It's not gonna stop what we do. It's not a popularity contest. We don't care if you approve or not, because what we're trying to do, like Acacia said, is try to help people. We're trying to save lives, and the big picture. I mean, for me, one of the motivating factors in doing this kind of work that I do now is when I started seeing some of the mass killings that were starting to happen coming from people affiliated with the far right. When you had the synagogue shootings, the mosque shootings, church shootings, these sort of things, I said to myself, when I was in the movement, some of this stuff was starting to happen. I said, I can't, even though it wasn't NSM members, it was still people that believed in the ideology. I said, I can't stand by and do this anymore. I can't be part of this. I have to be a voice against this sort of thing to try to save lives. And it's not, and then the small-minded concept of the person hearing that and looking from the outside, looking in, going, and I've heard people say this. They've said, he's trying to save his old Nazi buddies. He's trying to save that Nazi that's going to go do the next church shooting or the next synagogue shooting. No, you closed-minded bigot. I am trying to save the innocent lives of hundreds of people that could become a victim of something like that. It's not about saving the one. That's a closed-minded way of looking at it. Sure, you save the one. But what about all the innocents? What if we could have in advance known, I mean, this is not reality, but what if in advance one could have stopped the synagogue shootings, the church shootings, the mosque shootings, and kept those things from ever happening and all those lives from being lost? That's something to contemplate. That's something to let resonate. That's something to think about. That's what we hope to do. That's what we're trying to do with this concept. That's why we do this kind of work. That's why we put ourselves out there, put ourselves at risk for saying these things and saying things that might not be popular. I know there's people in the CVE confronting violent extremist community that don't like what we're saying because they think that it's too radical, or they don't like the concept, or they don't like us. I really don't care. The whole point is we're out here trying to save lives. It's not a popularity contest. If you don't like us, don't listen to us. But do support the work we're trying to do, because we are changing lives, we're saving lives, and we're making a difference out here. And we will continue to do that, whether someone out there or 1 people, 10 people, 100 people, you don't like us, that's your business. We're going to keep doing this good work, and we're going to keep calling it like it is, telling the truth, and we're not going to, you can't pull our strings and make us say stuff. We're going to say what we know works, and we're going to keep hammering that ideology and those issues until as long as we can. As long as there's lives that need changing and saving, we're out here.
Exactly. And it doesn't happen overnight. And we're going to keep on doing this. I know in the upcoming weeks, we've got some really, really good guests coming on. I'm really, really looking forward to it. And I'm not going to have any spoilers. So definitely be listening. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. We're on Spotify. We're also on Apple Podcasts. We're also on Amazon Music and several others. So definitely, if you're not able to watch the videos, go ahead and go to Spotify or go to Spreaker and check it out, the podcasts there. And we will see you next time.
Be there.